All right, good afternoon. Every weekend or every week, excuse me, I'm going to try to give you guys a little bit of a guided reading slash a little bit of a lecture about the material that you are reading and working on in each of these chapters. This chapter, chapter 15, as you can read for yourselves, is about maritime expansion in the Atlantic world. And from the breakdown here, you can tell where we're going here. This is about the Spanish, the Portuguese arrival in the New World, and what really sometimes is called the Age of Exploration. So you'll take a look at the Aztec Empire of Mexico, the Inca, all right, what they were like as before the Europeans arrived. Then you'll switch over and start taking a look at what's going on in Europe, and eventually place the Spanish and the Portuguese here in the New World, and finish up talking about things like the Columbian Exchange, which is what you'll be doing your discussion board about this time. So let's take a look at some of the highlights of this chapter. You begin by taking a look at and I'm going to skip on over kind of this introduction here, and take you over to the beginnings, which really is about we really kind of start with the Aztec Empire here. Look at your focus questions here, okay? How did the Aztec form their empire? How did the Inca form theirs? So you're really looking as you read these sections, okay? For how the Aztecs, how the Inca began to create a civilization, okay? In many ways, the Aztec and the Inca are they're not the only, but by the time the Spanish arrive and the Portuguese arrive, they are really the only major Native American civilizations here in the Western Hemisphere. So we have to pay attention to them, and we have to sort of take a look at what they're doing. So for this first part here, make sure that you kind of think about the answer to this, okay? I would suggest for each of you that as you go through this, that you jot down some notes. Okay, it's going to make it easier as you study. It's going to make you easier as it's going to make it easier as you prepare to study for your exams. Simply reading is not going to cut it. Simply doing your homework is not going to cut it. So I would suggest sort of taking some notes. Okay, make yourself an outline as you go through these things, especially know what some of these major terms are. Okay, so you can read from the beginning where the Aztecs come from. Okay, the Mexica, the Maya. Okay, they have some traits of all of them. Okay, and so the Nahua peoples they are really kind of the beginnings really of the study of the Aztecs. Okay, the so you'll take a look at some of what they were doing. Okay, how they developed, how they enslaved the people around them. Okay, and how they really enforce the people around them to do the labor, to do the work, while they concentrated on doing things like building pyramids in their society and their culture. Okay, so you get the some of the that information here. Okay, and about the development of Tenochtitlan and as the capital, and which is today Mexico City, and some of this material. So make sure that you take some notes as you go through this. The This is really important. Okay, the uh, the development of Aztec religion. It was a very warrior, very bloody, very human sacrifice driven religion. So this is one of the reasons why the Aztec were so warlike, why captives were so important, because they were the ones that would be sacrificed to the sun gods, why they have so many religious structures, Okay, so this is one of those things that you should make sure that you understand. Okay, the a little bit about their religion, the society, how their society was ordered. Okay, the importance of their crops, how they use their military to conquer this whole area. So the text is trying to draw you a picture of how the Aztecs became such a powerful society. Conquest, religion, society, all sort of worked together to make the Aztecs very powerful. They conquered their neighbors. They set up a very powerful, very dominant civilization in what is today central Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula in that area. But it also made them vulnerable. And when the Spanish arrive, the Spanish will be able to take advantage of a lot of the anger directed towards the Aztecs and get some of the Aztec or some of the people that the Aztecs had conquered to help them on their way to Tenochtitlan. All right. After looking over really essentially the development of the Aztec Empire, which is really what this sort of looked like when the Spanish arrived. The textbook shifts over to talk about the Inca. Okay, and you move south a little bit into South America as you study the Inca. The the Inca, the textbook takes you through about how they ordered their society. Okay, how they were ruled over by kings. Some of the structures that they built, like Machu Picchu here, and how they did their farming, okay, where the Inca Empire stretches down the Andes right here. Okay, and this is not a tremendously hospitable area. And so you will find out that they ended up conquering some other areas because they needed crops, they needed goods that were produced in different, really geographic areas. It talks about the Inca really forms of warfare. Okay, how the Incas used labor. Okay, and how they built roads up to link these areas together. You can see the road system kind of as it links the Inca Empire together. All right, so essentially, like I told you guys, you are getting an idea of the two major Native American civilizations, all right, as they and what they look like and how they were organized, how they were structured before the Spanish arrived. Okay. Now, I told you the textbook would shift gears, okay, and take you back to Europe and take a look at what was going on in Europe during this period. So, in this sort of 200-year period that the textbook talks about here, you've shifted from North America and South America back over to Europe to see what's going on over here. And essentially, what you're going to talk about is the beginnings of the Renaissance. Okay, humanism is one of the hallmarks, really, of the beginnings of the Renaissance. I mean, it's part of the Enlightenment later on. Okay, so it's a big deal. It believes that we as humans are capable of great things. Okay, and we can do great things even without necessarily the help of a deity. So some of the things that you see to that begin to pop out of this, okay, is that this desire really to see what's out there, to explore. So the Renaissance is going on, okay, and it's this evolution. It's the end, really, of the Middle Ages, and it's this transition into this new period, rebirth. That's what the Renaissance means, okay. So it's more than just art. It's more than just really literature, which is usually seems to get all of the press. But it is, it's I mean, there are advances scientifically, like the movable type printing press, all right, which will allow the easy publication of books and pamphlets and material. When that happens, more people have access to ideas. More people have access to facts, and so you start to hear about things that are published and then read and consumed by people in Europe. The For example, this desire really to gain access to China, to Italy, or excuse me, to India. And if you were able to do that, the potential for wealth was tremendous. So European navigators began to explore not only out into the Atlantic, but also began to look for ways to get to India and to China, because if they could, then they would have access to goods that were in high demand in Europe. The first to really try to get access to the wider world are the Portuguese, thanks in large part to Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator is the person who supports Portuguese navigation by not only exploring parts of the western coast of Africa, but also by constructing a school for navigators and sailors to teach them how to use some of the new technology, compasses, astrolabes. The idea of navigation is what's going to allow the Portuguese, and I'm sorry, I know it's flipped here on us, but Portugal's right here on the western coast of Spain. And notice what the Portuguese began to do. They began to sail around Africa before eventually ending up in the Far East. It'll be the Portuguese that sort of that managed to find their way into the desired areas, and that's an important step. It gives them access to these new markets. So the Portuguese really way of doing this was to sail south, having contact with Africa, skirt the coast of Africa, round Africa, and eventually end up in India. One of the side effects of this is the beginnings of the Portuguese slave trade. So here you will read about how the Portuguese will start to take people out of Africa and began to use them and sell them in the slave markets. Okay. And so notice what the Portuguese did. Okay. They made agreements with rulers in Africa to trade horses for captives each year. So what the Portuguese began to do is to set a precedent of having African chiefs, African rulers go out, conquer neighbors, and exchange them for other goods. And eventually those goods will change, but this is the beginnings really of the slave trade. And you'll kind of follow this up later on. Okay. Now, this leads us to the point where we get to Columbus. Okay. If the Portuguese were able to sail south around Africa and make it to India and China and have access to those goods, then why couldn't the Spanish? Columbus takes advantage of that by trying to convince the Spanish kings and queens that he could sail west around the globe and end up in India and China. And so Columbus tries to market this idea to several monarchs in Europe without a whole lot of success. And so, but eventually he does. Once Spain comes out of the Reconquista, Isabella and Ferdinand, the joint monarchs, will agree to fund Columbus's first voyage, which ends up to the Americas. Now, here's the thing, okay? Do not think that Columbus was sailing westward to try to find America. That's totally false. Okay, the Columbus was sailing west to try to get to India and China. How do you know that? Well, when he gets to what he thinks is India, which is not. Okay, he is in really in parts of the Caribbean. He names those peoples Indians. Okay, he thinks he's in India. He's not. Okay, but he happens to run into the North American, South American continents and realize that there is something out there. Now, this is terrible for the Spanish when you really think about it, because they were trying to get to India and China, and instead they have this whole new massive area that they have to deal with. So once they really realize what Columbus has discovered, they're going to have to put even more money and effort into exploring what he's really found. Now, notice that Columbus, and I want you guys to remember that Columbus is not out there trying to discover America. He discovers America totally by accident. Columbus is trying to get to India and to China, and really his arrival in America is a mistake. He's not the only one, okay? The Chinese, and this is kind of a holdover from the first part of this class. The Chinese had been trying to do some of the same things. They had sent out a really a great fleet under Admiral Zheng He. Zheng He sends out, and they're trying to get out and find out what's out there as well. The Chinese don't really sort of find anything that overwhelms them. Okay, so they don't really kind of pay attention to any of the things that they found. The Spanish, though, do. Okay, and they have to, rather than really closing themselves off, the Spanish and the Portuguese are both going to begin to add more effort into finding out exactly what it is they have found. Okay, so after going through this, okay, we'll get back over here and talk about what the Spanish do next once they figure out that Columbus has found something new. Then the Spanish are going to have to invest a little bit in what they have found. Once the Spanish and the Portuguese, who both have found themselves making their way into the exploring game, they will sign a treaty with one another. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas. Essentially, what it does is it splits the world. Okay, it's an important thing, and rather than fighting about what they are exploring over, they agree to, since it was negotiated by the Pope, they agree to essentially split the world and stay out of each other's way. The Spanish and the Portuguese continue to send navigators and explorers into the New World, trying to figure out what they have. And of course, you know what happens next, or I hope you do, that once they get over here, they are eventually going to run into the Aztec and the Inca. Okay, the Spanish will decide to conquer the Aztecs. Okay, and Cortez is the Spanish conquistador responsible for conquering the Aztec Empire. The Spanish under Pizarro will conquer the Inca and defeat Atahualpa and take control of the Inca. So those two great civilizations that we started and set up at the beginning of this chapter have been conquered by the Spanish relatively easily. And that kind of causes us to pause a little bit. Okay, what's the reason why? And we'll explore that a little bit later when we get to the end of this. And I want to kind of tell you a little bit about why that happens. By the way, the Portuguese accidentally sailed too far west and lay claim to what today becomes Brazil. The Cabral, who is a Portuguese explorer, really swings too far westward on his journey around Africa and bumps into Brazil. Well, they, of course, lay claim to that. Brazil, instead, will lay claim to Brazil, and eventually Brazil becomes a major producer of sugar. The Caribbean and Brazil will both be major areas of sugar production. Sugar production is tough. It requires a tremendous amount of effort to produce large amounts of sugar, growing the cane, harvesting the cane, crushing the cane, starting all of that work over again is tremendously difficult and requires a ton of labor. Well, that labor is going to be eventually supplied by first an attempt to use the Native Americans, which does not go very well because they die, and then second with Africans. Africans who are being exported from Africa as slaves will be brought here in large enough numbers to start to be used as slaves, especially in sugar producing areas, both in the Caribbean and in Brazil. Most scholars today believe that about 80% of the people that were exported out of Africa either went to Brazil or the Caribbean as sugar producing slaves. Okay, so that need for labor is going to be a huge driving force eventually in slavery. The Spanish, like I told you, try to use the Native Americans for labor support or labor source. You can read about the encomienda here. Okay, after conquering the Aztecs and the Inca, many of the Native Americans would be used to try to use them as a slave or as a slave system, and it doesn't work because they end up dying. Okay. Also, the king was not real strong, not really very supportive of the encomienda because he didn't really have a whole lot of control over it. And eventually, the king will want to be in control of it, and that will lead to a shift from the encomienda to the viceroyalty, where the king appoints people to go over and rule in his name in the New World. The chapter finishes with this, the Columbian Exchange, okay? And you need to make sure that you understand what the Columbian Exchange is, okay? It's an exchange going on, and we call it the Columbian Exchange because it technically begins with Columbus, but it is an exchange that goes on as long as the Europeans begin to interact with the Native Americans. Then this exchange is taking place. Europeans will bring over animals and foods that did not exist in the New World. The horse, the cow, the sheep will come to Americas, flourish here, but are introduced species. Okay, tomatoes, potatoes, peanuts, peppers will all make the journey from here, where they were native in North and South America, back to Europe. And of course, potatoes become a major staple crop in parts of Europe. The exchange is not just animals and plants. It's not just foods, okay, and it's not just animals. The Columbian Exchange is also an exchange of disease. The Europeans brought with them diseases that they had developed up or had developed an immunity to, or at least a resistance to a group of people here who have been isolated for thousands of years, and instead are going to be confronted with really diseases that ravage them because they have no resistance. Smallpox was the most devastating, okay? And smallpox is a virus. It is very contagious. It is, once it sort of gets into a population, it can be easily transmitted. All right, think about how easy the chickenpox is transmitted among kids before the chickenpox vaccine. Now, smallpox is the same way, and it is a very virulent disease, one that causes you to run a very high fever, and you either once the pox hits you, you've got about 10 days. If you make it through 10 days and survive, you'll probably be scarred for life, but you'll survive. The others won't, and the fever is just terrible, okay, and as well as the pox. The smallpox has a devastating effect on the Native American population. There are estimates that will say that upwards of 80 to 90% of the Native American populations will be wiped out by smallpox. Okay. So we don't know really how virulent it was, but it is, like we said, very, very, very devastating. Different historians, like this part says, have come up with different numbers. Okay. The there is, I mean, you can talk about numbers. Millions of Native Americans will die, but probably if you want to talk about percentage, probably somewhere between 80 to 90% of any population would die after exposure to smallpox. There is some evidence that syphilis, a venereal disease that will be brought back from the Americas back to Europe. So there is some evidence that syphilis was here in the Americas, and it would then be brought back to Europe after contact with the Europeans. It's not as deadly as smallpox is, okay, but it is a disease that seems to have crossed over from North and South America back into Europe. That's what you'll be writing your discussion board about. So make sure that you understand what really the Columbian Exchange is. Okay. And the book kind of finishes up talking about how this is really a break, that 1492 is really this sort of landmark date where Europe now has shrunk the world. The world is a much smaller place. The North and South Americans, the native populations, have been isolated for thousands of years. Well, that is not true anymore. And after Columbus's landfall, then the Europeans are able to conquer these areas very efficiently because of the outbreak of disease and because of new weapons, new technologies that the Europeans were familiar with, but that the natives had no access to. So this is really the beginnings of the modern age. Okay. All right. That finishes chapter 15. Okay. So hopefully that'll give you an idea about what you need to be looking for as you do your reading. Please take my advice. Try to make you some outlines as you go through. Okay. Use those sort of core concepts that I pointed out to try to help you organize yourself into a little bit of an outline. The chapter PowerPoints will help with that too. So as you go through this and as you read through this, try to not only answer those questions, but also try to make you out a little bit of an outline so that when you go back to study, you'll have that and you'll have a good guide. Okay, until the next time.